Hi, I'm Catherine.
And I'm Gail, and welcome to Women Over 70 Aging Reimagined, our award-winning weekly podcast. Visit womenover70.com to learn about how you may become involved. Join Aging Reimagined Circle and enjoy free participation in online monthly programs. Thank you so much for listening. Before we begin our interview, we'd like to share a new product with you from skintensive.com. Our skin gets more fragile and sensitive as we age. Mystery bruises on hands, arms, or legs start showing up out of nowhere. That's why I love Bruise Cream by Skintensive. Developed by two Harvard-trained dermatologists, Skintensive is made for mature skin and helps bruises fade faster while moisturizing. It's gentle, unscented, and truly effective. Find Bruise Cream and other great skincare for mature skin at skintensive.com. That's SKINTENSIVE.com. Your skin will thank you.
Today, we're bringing back a former guest, Nancy Manahan. Nancy? And Nancy is with us today as the friend and literary executor for an extraordinary woman, Josephine Alexander. Her granddaughter, Natalya Lukin, who is also here with us today, discovered Joe's unpublished memoir after Joe died at age 83. Natalya reached out to Nancy to help edit and bring to publication Joe's fascinating memoir, At Sea on the Range, from Berkeley Radical to Arizona Homesteader, 1934 to 1948. And in the preface, Natalya reflects, I'll read this, by the time I came of age and Grandma Jo was in her late 70s, her political activism, critiques of our socioeconomic system, appreciation of art and artists, and remarkably active love life had all captured my attention. Nonetheless, until her death, my knowledge of Grandma Jo's life was short on details. So welcome, Nancy and Natalya, to Women Over 70. We're eager to hear more details about Grandma Jo's extraordinary life and about your collaboration on her memoir. So let's begin with just have each of you describe your relationship with Josephine, with Joe. Nancy, would you start?
Sure. I met Jo when I was in my 30s, and she was in my 60s. I thought she was ancient, but she was wrinkled from, I learned later, her 14 years with no sunscreen of living in the Arizona desert and doing a lot of outdoor work on this cattle ranch and raising chickens and raising vegetables and driving cattle 40 miles from the train station back to the ranch and just being an outdoors woman, going everywhere on horseback. We met very accidentally, and I am so grateful because she turned out to be my dearest friend when we were both living in San Francisco until her death 30 years later. And she was an extraordinary woman, a passionate, well-read intellectual, deeply politically committed to social justice, very much involved in the arts, fun and funny. And as Natalya mentioned in the quote that you just read from her preface, had a remarkably active love life. So she was a wonderful role model as a younger woman of someone who had body positivity and acceptance of her aging body, and a very vibrant love life, which I got to witness once in a while when one of her paramours would stroll out of the bedroom in the morning after I'd come late at night to stay overnight. And probably the thing I should say most of all is that she was a terrific writer, and she wrote all her life from the time of her college experience or college years at the University of California, Berkeley, until her death. She was still writing a new novel at the time of her death. So she's one of these just extraordinarily powerful, but in a very balanced way, women who I think have a lot to teach the rest of us.
How did you become her literary executor?
Well, she was working on a book when we first knew each other, and she knew that I was a college English teacher, and she asked for some feedback and editing help with it, and I was very happy to do that. It ended up being published by a major New York publisher, and it was called America Through the Eye of My Needle. And so when she was working on her memoir for 14 years in Arizona, she had the manuscript pretty much prepared, and an editor said that she really needed to have more details. And so she asked me if I would like to go with her to Arizona on a memory enhancing trip. And I said, sure. So my next Easter vacation, I think it was, from teaching, we rented a little car. And we were both dirt poor. Neither one of us had a car. I rented a tiny car. I threw my backpacking tent and a couple of sleeping bags in the back and a couple of little tiny thermal rest pads. And off we went, driving from San Francisco to Arizona to go back to Joe's old stomping grounds and the ranch. And we met the famous Harry, her husband, the cowboy, the rancher, not cowboy, I shouldn't call him that. And when we got back home, Joe went to work incorporating all that she had learned into that book. But specifically to answer your question, at some point she said, when I die, I'm not sure what's going to happen to all of my unpublished work. She'd only been able to get that one book into print. Would you be my literary executor? And I said, well, I don't know. I've never done something like that. What would it involve? Well, you just try to get my essays and my books published. And so I said, I don't know. I suppose I could try to do that, thinking this was some event far off in the future, because even though she was 30 years older at that point than when I had met her. 20 years older. There was a 30-year age difference. She was very healthy, very vibrant, walked all over San Francisco and Golden Gate Park. And so I've eventually reluctantly said yes. And then she died a year later. So I was able to get 2 of her essays into print in a wonderful book edited by Margaret Cruikshank, a gerontologist. And I couldn't get any of her books or any of her other essays. I just didn't know how to go about it. In the days before internet and in the days before self-publishing, made the publishing industry less of a gatekeeping enterprise. And so I just gave up and felt horribly guilty that I was not able to do more for my dear friend. And then, out of the blue, Natalya contacted me.
Natalya, you are the granddaughter of this remarkable woman. So what was your relationship like with her?
Well, I'm one of 3 granddaughters. The others live up in Washington. And I grew up in San Francisco, so, I had closer proximity in some regards. And I remember as a kid and a teenager, like, we would get together for various holidays and do things around the city. She liked to show, bring me to some of her favorite places, like the Cliff House. And however, like Nancy mentioned, she never had much money, so there was always like a little trick to going places with her. Like, it was like, oh well, we'll just go and we'll share a salad, So, but we sat in the big dining room and enjoyed the view, because she was somebody, as Nancy will also attest, really liked to enjoy life as much as possible and treat herself when possible. Anyway, she was just a really unique character and a very small package, but a powerhouse. She was kind of an eternal optimist, always could see interesting things in everybody she met, and had a knack for making friends at bus stops or anywhere. That was part of her skills as a reporter, I think, is that she just was very interested in people and their stories. And I think that comes across also in this book, among other things.
Yeah, definitely. So she was part of your life until she died. Is that right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Mm, Um, in fact, I think I spent more time alone with her when I was older, in my late teens and 20s. Before then, it was more like family gatherings. But I just, and the ranch would be mentioned, like, oh, there was this ranch, and I knew that there was still some furniture in her little apartment on Heath Street that was from the ranch, this like chairs and stuff. But I never, when you're a kid or teenager, you're in your own world. So I didn't ask her. I didn't even think to ask. Um, it was just kind of like, oh yeah, whatever it was. So reading the book, when I finally read it after she died, um, I was blown away. Especially because I have a background in environmental studies and had my own dreams of getting back to the land. So seeing this story, I was just stunned because she was a city person. She lived in the hate in San Francisco, very city life. I had no idea. And I just thought, the ingenuity that her and Harry displayed in this book, and and a lot of the societal commentary, it's all very timely today. So I think it's on an interesting read.
Yes, it is. So this is the obvious question. I think you both kind of addressed it. But what compelled you to bring this story, her story, to life, to the public? Why was this so important?
I think it was pretty personal for both of us when Natalya contacted me, and eventually, through great ingenuity, was able to convert this old typed on an IBM Selectric manuscript with notations and a new line of type in between the double spaced lines. It was just a mess of a manuscript, really. And it's just miraculous that she was able to convert it to a digital format that we could edit. And when she sent it to me, I had never read it. And like Natalya, it just knocked my socks off. Oh my gosh, I had no idea. Even though I'd been with her to Arizona, she hadn't ever shared the manuscript with me. So I just fell in love with this book and thought, this is a story. It may take place in the early part of the 20th century, middle 20th century, but as a story of a courageous and intrepid and extremely adaptable young woman, it's just not only interesting, but she can be a role model for anybody to follow their own heart, for one thing, to trust in themselves, and to surmount what would seem to be impossible challenges of an extremely different culture. That's why the title is so perfect. Home on the range. Well, no, that little romantic notion of Americans feeling right at home on the range was so not true for her. And she really was at sea, knocked off balance continually by terrible and uncomfortable surprises. Not at all steady, not at all comfortable for a long time, until eventually she learned to love the desert and love her life as a homesteader. So I think it's so important that we have role models of really courageous and capable. Oh my gosh, she was so capable. She could do anything, I think.
I think so too. And for you, Natalya, this is personal, of course.
Well, there was just so many parts of it. It's just we don't hear enough stories about women during that time period doing this kind of thing. And I mean, the Dude Ranch really was her idea, and her way of making money, having a business and surviving out there when Harry's dairy farm was not bringing in very much. And so, I mean, so much of it was driven by her in the story that she wrote. It's just it's just a really remarkable story to me, and I think that a lot of people are interested in those topics of environmentalism and peace during wartime, because it is set in the build up to World War II, and so she's reflecting, during that a lot about political events. Those turn up in the story as well. So, and Nancy, even though we had never met, I'd heard about Nancy forever. I knew about her books, and I knew that she was one of Joe's friends. And so it was just kind of a serendipitous bunch of events in a way, because I was helping pack up everything of Joe's daughter for her to go to assisted living. So my mom, and that was the first time I came across, I could really read all these papers. I had never seen most of it, and I had no idea about her whole background as a reporter, the real depth of it with her weekly columns. The one that I mentioned, Beachcombing, is only one of her weekly columns. She had another one called Southern Exposure prior to that. And so I was just like, I just felt like, I didn't want her to disappear into obscurity. And I, and especially because she had a really major role in preventing the PG&E plant from being built that isn't told. So I just took a chance and reached out to Nancy, and was just really thrilled that she also really cared and wanted this to be out there.
So, what were some of the highlights of your working together on this book?
We had a remarkable collaboration. It was just like another gift for me from Joe. It was a joy from Joe to meet and work with her granddaughter, who has incredible editing skills, practically equal to a college English teacher, moi. So that was just part of the joy of working with someone who was as compulsive about every little comma and verb tense and construction of a sentence as I was. It was the most fun project for me to collaborate with Natalya, and we had a bunch of differences of opinion, and that was part of the satisfaction, I think, that we could discuss our differences. I wanted to change this paragraph or delete it. Natalya did not, and we would just talk this through. And there's something magical about editing collaboratively, I find, that I feel through the whole process deeply connected to the author, my friend Joe Alexander, and then also deeply connected to her granddaughter, Natalya Lukin. So it was a personal joy, a professional satisfaction, and it used all of my skills. And it's not easy at 78 or 77 to find a project that draws forth your expertise quite as wonderfully as co-editing and publishing at Sea on the Range.
I loved it. It was so wonderful to get to know Nancy during this period, and all the intellectual stimulation and and sleuthing and detective work that, had to be in, because sometimes she could be a little obscure in her writing, and we're trying to tease out, like, what her point was, or just polish these gems, that are throughout the book, but trying to stay true without changing it a lot. It was a delicate balance. It was tough at times, but anyway, it was a great collaboration, and we spent many hours on the phone and video calls. So, well, months.
Months and months. So just for our listeners, Natalya's on the West Coast. Nancy's, are you still in San Francisco, Natalya?
Florida.
Oh, Nancy, you're in Florida. Natalya, are you still in San Francisco?
Santa Cruz.
Yeah. Yeah. So coast to coast.
Bi-coastal collaboration.
Yeah. And you did not meet in person?
Nope, we never did. This was partially during COVID, so I wasn't doing a lot of traveling during those years.
Sure. Well, you've already mentioned some things that you just didn't know before about Jo and her life, or that you might have forgotten about. Is there anything else that comes to mind that just really stood out for you in her experiences?
I have one thing. How about Natalya? Do you?
I'm not sure. You go first.
Well, one thing I learned from working on the book, I wasn't surprised by her amazing, deep and wide knowledge of literature, because she graduated from UC Berkeley as a literature major with, I think, a minor in anthropology. That's one of the wonderful things about the book. She approaches her experience in Arizona as an anthropologist, which makes her observations especially smart and valuable. But yes, her literary allusions, everything from Homer to Chaucer to Shakespeare to Jane Austen to contemporary playwrights, that was one of the things that Jo and I bonded over. So I knew she was well read and just so smart. But what I didn't really understand until I read this book was how deep and important her Jewish identity was to her. The text is sprinkled with not only literary, but historical and cultural and spiritual references to Judaism and her family and her, well, she had told me many times about her grandfather, the rabbi, and I knew she was terribly proud of him. And didn't, like you, Natalya, I didn't say, Jo, tell me more about him. Where was his temple? And tell me more about yourself as a Jewish woman. I just kick myself now for not really engaging more with her in that part of her life, as well as her 14 years in Arizona. But there's just these really graceful allusions to Jewish culture. And then, of course, while she was in Arizona, as Natalya mentioned, it was the build-up to World War II. So she was seeing the horrifying rise in anti-Semitism. And because she was so politically aware, she wasn't isolated on the farm and didn't hear the news. She knew what was going on, and of course it was terrible. So yeah, so I have a much deeper appreciation for her as a Jewish woman than I did when I was with her. And maybe, I don't know, she was kind of being gentle. I think she often was very gentle with my ignorance. She knew that I had a good heart and that I adored her. And she probably didn't need to make me feel as inferior as I should have felt intellectually and culturally. The arts and music and literature. She was far more well-read than I, a college English teacher, for example. So I think maybe this is one area where she thought, yeah, this will ex-Catholic girl. I'm just going to leave her to her ignorance and not try to raise her consciousness. But I wish I had done more.
Yeah.
How was that side of your grandmother aware? Were you aware of that side of your grandmother? Her religious bent and her how she cared about it and how it infected her and living in those times?
It wasn't a huge topic of conversation. I mean, I knew about her grandfather, and there's photos that she had of him and one of his inventions, because he was an inventor and a playwright, and he was in the legislature in Nevada for a period, and a lot of different accomplishments. But she wasn't a practicing Jew, and she didn't. I think she was much more into social activism in general than religion. I don't know what her religious beliefs were really. So yeah, it was again something that I don't know the answer to. It's just kind of mentioned in passing here and there when it would come up.
Right.
Is there I don't mean to put you on the spot. Is there an excerpt or two that you'd like to read from the book? Share from the book?
I would.
Nancy would. Come up.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Nance.
When Joe fell in love, Joe and Harry fell in love, he brought her out to his little shack. Natalya, could you describe the shack and your astonishment when you realized from the picture of it that you managed to find in that treasure trove as you were moving your mom, what you realized the shack really was and how many people were living in it?
Well, yeah, I think that when in the book, when she kind of mentions it, she'll say that it was miserable or fly blown or subhuman, words that I didn't take that seriously until I really put it all together and looked at the picture where they're standing next to this shack. When at the time she met Harry, there were 8 people living in it, and it was probably a lot less than 200 square feet. I mean, it was a very small little thing that was just boards. And I actually, he had thrown it together really quickly prior to that. And he lived in it with 2 of his brothers, one of the brothers' wife, and their 4 children, all in this little shack that, I actually had a part I could read about that if I can read that one first.
Sure.
So they had met and got married 2 weeks later, but the thing that convinced her was he said he was going to build her a house, which ties into what Nancy's going to say. But before that, there's a part where she says, "So there it was. If I wanted Harry, and I did, I'd have to marry him. But where would we live? Kitty and I rode over to Alexander's one day. None of my most literary acquaintanceship with frontier life had prepared me for that first view of the home Harry had invited me to share. There wasn't room for me. There wasn't room for Harry. There wasn't room for the 4 small children, the oldest 5 years old, running or crawling in and out or clinging to their mother's bibbed overalls, fingers and mouths, staring at me and Kitty as though we were the first strangers they'd ever seen. There wasn't room for any human. The flies took up all the space. There were screens in the openings in the walls that served for windows, with framed canvas shading them from the outside to let down in case of rain or cold, relief that seemed unlikely in the intense scorching May heat. There was a screen door too, but it was a polite gesture. Even if the 3 children had not been running in and out, the screen door would have held out only the less enterprising flies, too lazy to find the large gaps and cracks that invited them into one of the few shady refuges within miles. Outdoors, the flies lacked in shade what they made up in outdoor, what the flies lacked in shade, they made up in breeding ground. The rich smell of the corrals, just a short distance from the shack, testified to that. There's just a little bit more. I looked at the girl who lived in this dreadful place with what I hoped was polite neighborly detachment. I'd seldom seen a prettier woman. Myrtle Alexander was 21 at the time, 3 years younger than I, the mother of 4, but a child, a tomboy kid. I didn't meet Myrtle's husband, John, that day. I didn't meet either of Harry's 2 brothers who were living on the homestead. The youngest, Vic, hadn't returned from high school. And John was only a distant cloud of dust, a tractor man plowing a field. Had either of them come in, some of the flies would have had to move. The Alexanders were tall men, and the ceiling did little more than clear their heads and bounce down the heat.
So, 6 months later, Joe woke up one morning and realized that although Harry had promised that he would build a home, a nice home, what? 4 weeks, 6 max, easy. Oh, so easy just to build a home. He hadn't lifted a finger. And the kitty that their nearest neighbor that Natalya mentioned is part of this next excerpt that I'd like to read. This is from the chapter called Women and Men, and it starts on page 88. My work left undone, I saddled Comanche, I was her favorite horse, and rode to Kitty's house. My one friend, my counselor, a sympathetic ear for the long-damned, only half-admitted grievances. But Joe, don't you know anything about men? Kitty said. They are all the same. They will promise you anything, but if you don't throw a fit, they won't do a thing for you. A fit? How do you throw a fit? I had devoted my life to the suppression of temper, and except for one incident, I had been totally successful. And here I was, being advised to indulge in a wild extravagance of passion, real or simulated. Kitty, when she finally realized that I had never thrown even a small baby fit, as far as I knew, stopped her work to give me a badly needed basic education in the facts of a woman's life. It was a man's world, she told me, surprised that a woman my age had not seemed to notice it. All the odds were stacked against women by the men who took it for granted that, however scrupulous they were in keeping their word to each other, promises made to women were made for their own expediency and could be broken for the same reason. In this man's world, women had 2 weapons, tears and fits, used singly or in combination. Kitty recommended combination. I was listening slack-jawed to this attractive, strong, healthy, capable woman who pulled her full weight in the business of earning the family living. But what about love, reason, justice, or just plain decency? Kitty brushed aside my abstract mouthings. Where had I been all my life? Men thought only of their own comfort, their own convenience. When they desired a woman, they made promises to get her. And when they had her, they had all they wanted. But the fits? Oh, men hate fits, she said. It spoils their peace. Often a single fit, even the best, does not accomplish much. But a series of fits wears a man down. And soon he would stir himself to give the woman what she thinks she has to have, so he can have peace again. I was enchanted by this new insight. If I wanted to save my marriage, I had to resign myself to spending the rest of my life in the homestead shack or learn how to throw fits. I rode home on my horse pensively. While she was talking, Kitty had swept me along with her. She was so sure. Away from her, my certainty wavered. I had spent my life learning to repress anger, sorrow, even fear. No British public schoolboy had been so indoctrinated in the cult of the stiff upper lip. No, I was asking myself to go home and throw a fit in front of my husband. I couldn't do it. No, I would have to find some other way. Well, at that point, her little dog, Rags, corners a rattlesnake. And Joe, as she had gotten very used to in the previous 6 weeks, off her horse, dropped the reins, looked around, picked up a mesquite branch, and started clobbering the snake until it was dead. And she realized that she, who was a passionate lover of animals and adamantly opposed to killing anything other than a little insect, had managed to change from someone like that to a woman who could casually kill a rattlesnake anytime she pleased. And she realized that if she could do that, well, then maybe she was capable of changing from being a repressed emotional person to being a woman capable of throwing a really good fit. I gave Rag's head a last pat before remounting Comanche, and she ends the chapter by saying, "Rags, I'm going to throw a fit tonight." So that's one of my favorite passages from At Sea on the Range.
Yeah, that is wonderful. Well, unfortunately, 30 minutes goes by very quickly. And
It does.
yes, this has just been wonderful. We really encourage everyone. This is a book to read, to be read and savored. And thank you, Nancy and Natalya, both for joining us and telling us about this and bringing it to more eyes and ears. Appreciate it.
Not only is it available in that paperback that you are holding up, which has, by the way, a whole 22-page section of photographs. Let me just look in the back. Well, anyway, yes, that Natalya digitized and enhanced and just went to all lengths to make Joe's, she was a prize-winning photographer, to make her old photos available. But it also is available as an ebook. So people who prefer to read on their devices can have access to At Sea on the Range as an electronic format.
I love the voice she writes in. It's very compelling. It really is. Yes. So
Yeah. So thank you, Catherine.
Yes, thank you both.
And listeners, we'd like to see more of you in our monthly online programs. Make your voice heard, as together we change the conversation about women aging. Visit Aging Reimagined Circle at womenover70.com. And we have a podcast to suggest to you, and that is Jennifer Fink's Fading Memories. It's a podcast for caregivers of loved ones with dementia. It provides insights and guidance on communicating effectively, managing stress, and coping with grief and loss. Until next time.